Helmut Marko just sent shockwaves through the entire Formula One paddock. The driver has been deprived of his dominant role, not stripped of an edge, not beaten by a rival, deprived. That word choice matters, because it means the rules themselves have taken something core away from the people sitting in those cockpits. Oliver Bearman crashed at 50G because of it. Max Verstappen is threatening to quit because of it. So, how did a rulebook built to improve racing end up removing the driver from the picture? That statement landed on April 10th, hours after the FIA held its first emergency meeting in London. Marko, the 82-year-old builder of Red Bull's driver program, chose his words with extreme care. He framed Verstappen as a pure-born racer, and then dropped the line that no one in the paddock could ignore. The current rules are heavily focused on energy management, and they only work hand in hand with the software engineers. The driver has lost the dominant role entirely, and Marko did not reach that conclusion overnight. His tone has been shifting all season, growing sharper with every race weekend. After Melbourne, where the broadcast celebrated 120 overtakes, Marko waved off the entire show. He would not call it overtaking, more like passing. Overtaking in the classic sense had not improved in any way, and he locked in on the most disturbing sign of the new era: the sound of a Formula One car lifting off the throttle on the main straight, a sound that is impossible to square with the identity of this sport. By the time the circus reached China, with Verstappen sitting 9th in the championship, the criticism got sharper still. Everything drivers once learned through years of karting is now useless under these rules. That was not a gripe about a setup problem or a lack of upgrades. That was an attack on the basic bond between a driver and their car being rewritten by lines of code. And what made those words hit so hard is that they came from a man who spent decades telling young drivers that raw talent would always find a way. The system he helped build at Red Bull was designed to spot exactly that: natural speed, instinct, the ability to pull lap time out of a car that nobody else could find. Now the man who believed in driver power above everything else was admitting that the new rules had made it pointless. The paddock has started calling it the software championship. And once you understand how the system actually works, you realize that name is not a stretch. The power unit in a 2026 Formula One car splits its output nearly 50-50 between the combustion engine and the electric motor. The combustion engine dropped from roughly 630 kilowatts to 400 kilowatts. The electric motor, the MGUK, tripled from 120 kilowatts to 350. That means the battery is no longer a helper. It is half the car, and half the car is now run by software that the driver cannot overrule. 3 of the 4 energy recovery methods are handled by the standard ECU: braking recovery, part throttle harvesting, and the one that has caused the most anger on the grid, super clipping. Super clipping lets the motor generator unit pull energy from the drivetrain at full throttle. The driver presses the pedal all the way to the floor, and the system takes up to 250 kilowatts out of the rear wheels to charge the battery. The result is a car that visibly slows down on a straight, even though the driver is asking for everything it has. Think about that for a moment. A Formula One driver floors the throttle, and the car slows down. Not because of drag, not because something broke, but because a computer decided the battery needs charging more than the driver needs speed. At Melbourne, drivers were downshifting on straights at full throttle just to deal with the power loss. The cars looked like they were hitting an invisible wall. On top of that, the ECU cuts electrical power above 290 km per hour and removes it completely above 345. No driver overrule exists for this. The software decides when the power goes away, and the driver has no button to press, no mode to pick, no way to push through it. It simply vanishes. And if you are watching from home, you can see the results play out in real time. 2 cars approach a braking zone side by side. One has a full battery, the other is mid-harvest. The speed gap between them can reach 50 km per hour on the same piece of track. That is not a gap between teams. That is 2 cars on different energy cycles, passing each other like they are in different classes. Fans watching on board cameras see drivers fighting steering wheels through corners that used to be flat out, wrestling with a car that swings between full power and partial power, depending on what the software has chosen to focus on that. Second, the broadcast has struggled to explain it. Commentators are describing moves that look like overtakes, but are really just energy cycles playing out. A car blasts past on a straight because its battery is full, loses the spot 3 corners later because the battery is empty, then takes it back when the cycle resets. The effect has been called yo-yo racing. The results feel random. For the people watching at home, it is confusing. It looks like racing, but the outcomes are decided before the driver even makes a choice. And then there is the problem that Leclerc found the hard way at Suzuka. The deployment software reads throttle inputs and tracks what it sees as state changes. If a driver makes a small correction, even as tiny as 2.7%, the ECU reads that as a new phase and resets its power curve. So the very thing that makes a great driver great The ability to make tiny shifts through a corner, to brake later and get on the power earlier, actually confuses the system. Leclerc braked later into spoon curve, got on the power earlier than the software expected, and the deployment timing shifted under him. He slid wide, a likely pole turned into fourth. The rules put a cap on his talent, and the software enforced it. That is what deprived truly means here. Not outdriven, not hurt by one team's design choices, held back by a system that punishes natural driving feel. And this is where the damage to the sport becomes clear in ways that go beyond lap times. Qualifying used to be the purest test of a driver's skill. One lap, no traffic games, no tyre plans, no pit wall meddling, just a driver and a machine on the absolute edge. Under these rules, qualifying has become an energy management task. The driver who puts together the best lap is not always the driver who drove the fastest. It is the driver whose software sent energy to the wheels most cleanly across the circuit. The onboard footage tells the story. Drivers are babying throttle inputs through corners where they would normally attack. Because pushing hard confuses the deployment code, they are leaving time on the table on purpose. Because going too hard in one corner costs them power in the next. Qualifying used to split the great from the good. Now it splits the teams with the best energy code from the teams still working it out. The moment in a race weekend that belonged fully to the driver has been taken over by software. And the drivers are not sitting quietly. What is happening right now inside the paddock is unlike anything the sport has seen in decades. Nearly the entire grid has turned against the very design of the cars they are racing. 20 of 22 drivers have raised concerns during official FIA briefings, and the two who have not are widely thought to be staying quiet for contract reasons rather than real satisfaction. Verstappen has been the loudest voice. These cars are Formula E on steroids. The racing is anti-racing. After China, the overtaking was compared to playing a video game, with the blunt take that anyone who enjoys watching this does not understand what real racing looks like. He is openly thinking about walking away from the sport for good, and that threat carries weight that goes beyond anger. Verstappen is the biggest name on the grid, the reigning multi-time champion, and the single largest draw for a generation of fans who grew up watching his battles with Hamilton. If he walks, he takes an audience with him. Norris, the reigning world champion, has framed it as going from the best cars ever built to the worst with a single rule change. The take is sharp. It is yo-yo racing when you are at the mercy of whatever the power unit decides to give you. The driver should control it, and right now, they do not. The rush of a hot lap has gone, because so much of the result is already set by the energy plan loaded before the car even leaves the garage. Alonso has started calling this the Battery World Championship. High-speed corners have become nothing more than charging spots for the car. Corners that used to split the great from the good now exist mainly to harvest energy for the next straight. Coming from a driver with over 20 years behind the wheel, that view carries the weight of someone who has lived through many rule eras and knows the gap between growth and going backward. Even the drivers winning races cannot stand behind the system. Antonelli has won 2 of 3 races for Mercedes this season, and even he admits that in some sections it feels like driving with handcuffs on. Leclerc has put together a personal team of software engineers to run every deployment scenario before each qualifying session. A 4-time Grand Prix winner now needs a team of coders to figure out how his own car behaves. The one clear outlier is Hamilton, who has embraced this as the best form of racing in his 20-year career. The ability to follow through high-speed corners without losing downforce is a real aero gain. Cars can follow more closely through fast corners than at any point in the modern era, but the pattern is hard to miss. The loudest fans of the new rules drive for the teams winning under them, Mercedes and Ferrari. The harshest critics, Verstappen, Norris, Alonso, have had awful starts to the rule cycle, and even within the positive camp, there is a sense that qualifying feels different now. That the one-lap thrill has lost something that is hard to pin down. The fans have noticed too. Social media has blown up since Melbourne, with clips of cars visibly slowing on straights, side-by-side clips against 2025 footage, and frustration that the racing they were promised does not feel like the racing they are watching. Forum threads on every major Formula One community are running hundreds of pages deep. The word that keeps coming up is fake. The overtakes feel fake. The speed gaps feel fake. The drama feels built by energy cycles rather than earned through driver skill. Viewing numbers for the Chinese Grand Prix dropped compared to the same race in 2025. And while there are always many factors behind audience figures, the timing has not gone unnoticed by Formula One bosses. The Grand Prix Drivers Association has turned all of this frustration into organized pressure on the governing body. The drivers' group chat has never been this busy. Messages are flooding in around the clock with emotions, competing fixes, and raw technical ideas. The message to the FIA was blunt. The speed gaps caused by the energy systems would lead to serious crashes, and then one did. Now here is where this becomes a political crisis, and not just a technical one. The FIA held a technical advisory committee meeting in London on April 9th. Teams, power unit makers, the FIA, and Formula One bosses all sat around the same table. The resulting statement confirmed what the paddock had been pushing for, a promise to make tweaks to some parts of the rules in the area of energy management. The fixes will be software and settings based, not needing hardware changes, and they can be put in place very soon. More meetings are locked in for April 15th and 16th. A key gathering on April 20th aims to lock in changes by electronic vote before the Miami Grand Prix on May 1st. The timeline is tight, and on purpose. Every race that passes without a fix is another race where trust in the competition fades. 6 specific ideas are on the table right now. All of them are built to work through software changes rather than physical tweaks to the cars. The first is raising the super clipping harvest limit from 250 kilowatts to 350, which would mostly get rid of the lift and coast driving that creates those dangerous speed gaps on straights. In practice, this means the car could harvest the energy it needs without stealing power from the driver at full throttle. The invisible wall effect on straights would shrink sharply. The second is cutting maximum deployment power below 350 kilowatts to smooth out the speed curve and let the battery last longer through each straight. Lower peak power means less harsh drop-offs when the battery runs dry, which leads directly to smaller speed gaps between cars at different charge levels. The third involves changing the ramp down rates on the electric motor so that power loss happens earlier and more gently, stopping the cliff edge moments where speed suddenly vanishes at the worst possible time. Right now, the power cuts off like a switch. This fix would make it feel more like a dimmer, giving the driver time to react, rather than having the car change its nature mid-corner. Those first 3 fixes deal with the physics of what happens on a straight. The next 3 go after the problem from the other side, changing how much energy the car needs to recover in the first place. The fourth is cutting energy recovery limits from 9 megajoules per qualifying lap to somewhere between 6 and 7, which would reduce the forced harvesting that pushes drivers into unnatural inputs. Less energy to recover means less time spent in harvest mode, which means more time spent actually racing. The fifth is opening up the active aero zones by possibly removing zone limits entirely, giving drivers the choice of when to flatten their wings, rather than having it set by track position. That change alone would put a real tactical choice back in the cockpit. And the sixth is the one that matters most at a deeper level, making the software limits simpler so they stop punishing driver inputs, getting rid of the mess, where a tiny throttle change resets the entire deployment curve, bringing back the basic rule that pushing harder in a Formula One car should always make it go faster. Right now, the fastest driver inputs do not always give the fastest result. This fix would change that. Bigger changes for 2027 are expected to come up later this year. Ideas include cutting electric power output from 350 kilowatts back to 250, raising fuel flow limits, or totally reshaping the split between combustion and electric power. Those talks will shape the next generation of rules entirely. But the crisis right now is about something bigger than settings and kilowatts. There is a power struggle playing out behind the scenes that will decide who actually steers the direction of Formula One for the next decade. Wolff's shift on this issue tells you everything about how the political winds have changed. At the start of the season, the Mercedes team boss backed the rules and brushed off much of the criticism as coming from teams who simply had not done a good enough job adapting. The message underneath was clear. Red Bull was struggling, so Verstappen was complaining. But after the Japanese Grand Prix, after the speed gap incident that shook the entire paddock, the tone from Mercedes flipped completely. The focus moved to bringing back the raw one-lap qualifying thrill and cutting the lift and coast problem. When the team winning races starts pushing for changes, you know the mood has moved past who is fast and who is not. And then the finger-pointing started, adding a whole new layer of tension. Wolff was named as the man behind the 50-50 power split between combustion and electric. The charge was that he pushed for that ratio based on Mercedes' Formula E background, and that the current mess is the direct result of that push. Whether that is fully fair is up for debate. But the claim has stuck in the paddock, and it has put Mercedes in the tough spot of defending rules that their own winning streak makes look rigged. The car maker politics make everything harder. 4 power unit suppliers now serve the grid, the most in over a decade. General Motors joined the sport partly because the heavy electric focus lined up with their green goals. Any pullback on the electric side risks pushing away the very car makers. The rules were designed to bring in. The FIA is stuck between the drivers wanting more control and the companies whose money depends on the engineering vision staying in place. That tug of war will shape every meeting between now and Miami. Meanwhile, Marko has placed himself as the voice of a generation watching the sport they built get rewritten by engineering ambition. His angle is clear. He is not arguing that Red Bull deserves a better car. He is arguing that the entire sport has drifted away from what makes it what it is. The word deprived is a claim about the soul of Formula One, not the standings. And that is the question the April meetings must answer. Not whether the settings can be changed, they clearly can. The FIA has made that clear. The question is whether the FIA, the teams, and the car makers are willing to admit that the whole vision behind the 2026 rules got something wrong. That in chasing green goals and car maker interest, they gave up the thing that makes 100 million people watch on a Sunday. The human being in the cockpit, pushing a machine to its edge, with nothing between them and the result except skill and nerve. The 6 fixes on the table can sand down the rough edges. They can shrink the speed gaps, give back some throttle control, and make qualifying feel more like a driver against the track. But they cannot change the basic design of a power unit that draws half its speed from an electric motor run by software. That moment of truth is coming. The 2027 rule talks will force every key player to answer a question they have been ducking since these rules were written. Is Formula One a tech showcase that happens to have drivers, or is it a drivers' championship that happens to use tech? Marko seems to know which way this is heading. His most recent stance was not just a knock on the rules, it was a warning. Formula One needs to change the rules as fast as it can to make the driver matter again. The word again carries the weight of the entire argument, because it means the sport already lost something, and now the clock is running to get it back, before the people who make it worth watching decide they have had enough.